Okay, this shit is getting ridiculous. It stopped recording again, saying that it's the browser itself. So I'm sitting here using fucking Google Chrome, and that shit still just seems to not be working. I'm likely gonna have to switch browsers here, but this is getting out of hand here. So I'm just kind of letting it go to see if it's going to keep recording or not. The browser says it's not letting me record. Wonder if I change items here. Still recording. Seems to get after a couple of minutes. Okay. I'm gonna go back to the whole Dyson Sphere thing. So, welcome to the Ella Mousonary Moment. My name is Brad Hathcock. I'm going to be doing a solo episode today without Aaron. I'm trying to test out a new laptop. We had a lost episode ultimately that was uploaded, I believe, only on Spotify, but heavily chopped together and put together. Aaron did a wonderful job there. Something's been going wrong with my laptop and everything, and it's not recording my tracks. So we've had some issues, obviously, switching over to this Riverside platform, but that's okay. We're going to work through them and get past it. So I am going to be on my own today. I'm testing out a couple things with my laptop to make sure that I can get the best video and audio recorded possible. But a couple of subjects I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Americans trying to flee Sudan. I'm going to talk about Ukraine a little bit in terms of NATO membership. Touch on a couple of other topics as well that we may not get to in some more future podcasts, and we want that information to still be very relevant. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was kind of an update on the Dyson Sphere that I did in my last episode. I like to talk about science and different things of that nature. So, the Dyson Sphere, I think it's a very interesting, cool kind of topic. It's a theory that goes around, just to refresh everybody's memory, about building an object to encapsulate the sun, and ultimately it would provide the entire Earth with like unlimited solar power, so that we could completely move away from, obviously nuclear power, gas, fossil fuels, all that kind of shit. So but it comes out that obviously the resources are not possible here, basically on Earth. And I was just reading an article about the possibility of liquidating Jupiter as an entire planet. So it would likely just be gone in order to get the resources that we need to build a Dyson Sphere. Gonna advise against that shit. Obviously, we don't know what the unintended consequences are of doing something like that. The the universe kind of works in like this crazy balance for things, and if you start removing mass from the planet Jupiter, then you could just throw everything out of orbit. You could fuck up something in the solar system. We kind of our solar system lives in like a harmony with each other, and everything kind of works off of each other in my opinion. So I don't think that that's a good idea. Obviously I think building a Dyson Sphere is like kind of a cool idea, but obviously highly unlikely to happen, especially in our lifetime, and probably in the next 50 or 60 lifetimes, especially given that the exhaustive resources that likely don't even exist here on Earth at any decent abundance in order to accomplish something like this. Um, so that's kind of where it lies. It's probably the last time I'll even talk about a Dyson Sphere, but I think it's pretty cool that the scientific community gets to throw out these different theories and things like that. But you can't really data model for eliminating basically a whole new planet within our solar system. Like, the data models for climate change come out all the time, and they've pretty much always been wrong. Uh, but you can't even data model for a complete just obliteration of a different planet in order to build a Dyson sphere. It's just not going to happen. So, I think, again, this is probably the last time I'll talk about a Dyson sphere, but I just think it's interesting. So if people want to look into that, I would say go look into it. Uh, a big thing that I feel is kind of flying under the radar currently in American politics is the situation in Sudan. Um, and basically, what's happening right now is that Americans were being told to leave because there's a civil war going on in Sudan. And I believe it's from two different military factions that are trying to basically take over control. And it's getting pretty nasty there. So Americans were told that they need to get out. Um, but they won't send the military really to help get people out. So they are hiring private security contractors to evacuate them, as well as other foreign nationals. Again, the U.S. government has indicated no plans to assist with the civilian evacuations. I believe that there is some 16,000 um, civilians living in Sudan, private citizens at least, that remain in the country. And so people are kind of starting to compare this a little bit to basically the 2021 American withdrawal from Afghanistan. Um, you know, 70 staffers got evacuated from the embassy in Sudan. Uh, but that still leaves, again, 16,000 people um, remain in the country. Of course, the government has come out and said that they've advised Americans not to travel to Sudan since August of 2021. And the embassy in Khartoum had a security alert on April 16th. Due to uncertain security situations in Khartoum, and that they closed the airport. So Americans should have no expectation of a U.S. government coordinated evacuation at this time. Uh, that's a tough one. This administration got raked over the coals for how bad Afghanistan ended, and as much as I obviously wanted us to be out of Afghanistan completely, they still botched it. I can be critical of the government for that. Of course, they did what I thought was right and what I wanted in moving out of Afghanistan, but they kind of fucked up on getting out of there. There's still today, translators and things like that in Afghanistan who helped the U.S. soldiers and things like that who are probably being persecuted for sure, probably being murdered in their homes by the Taliban. Um, you know, there's a movie about that now called The Covenant that just came out with Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's kind of about that whole situation about interpreters who helped the U.S. If they didn't get out and didn't get to the U.S. On some kind of visa. Um, Kind of got fucked. They were taking people's IDs and stuff and seeing if they were on interpreter lists, and it just kind of became really, really shitty and problematic. And we're kind of seeing the same thing happen in Sudan. 16,000 American lives. That is no small feat for sure. That is a lot of people. But when you're the U.S. government, you should be protecting your, you should be protecting your people here. You do have an embassy there, and you got all of them out. Sure, they kind of made the choice to live there, but Brittany Griner or whatever her name is, fucking, made the choice to take weed to a country where that's illegal, and we traded a warlord for her. So, I would say that the 16,000 Americans are probably more important than Brittany Griner ever is, was, or will be. Um, and that we should actually focus our efforts there to get the people out of Sudan. There I hate government spending, but sometimes some things are worth spending money on. Uh, and sometimes things aren't. Speaking of things that aren't worth spending their money on, going to Ukraine, everyone knows that I actually, well, the way Aaron makes me seem is that I completely oppose Ukraine, and that's just not true. I don't. I don't believe that any sovereign nation should have their borders invaded, and if that happens, I'm all for actually going to war for that. But this is kind of different. They are not a NATO country, and we'll actually kind of talk about that a little bit. But we are only really bound to protect NATO countries with military aid and everything else. And, as I've pointed out on this show before, most of the aid that we give to Ukraine does not even actually go towards its military. We're pretty much propping up their entire economy financially. But what was interesting is that the chief editor for a magazine called Defense Express in Ukraine says that the Ukrainian military needs $1.5 trillion in military aid for a war breakthrough. So basically, the editor in chief for this magazine kind of had a radio interview and basically has an understanding of the Ukrainian armed forces needs. He's saying that the calculations that were provided were correct, and goes on to say that if we understand that Ukraine has already received over $50 billion in aid in just over a year, then 10 times more, which is 1.5 trillion, would be enough to completely tip the balance of power in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. That's a lot of fucking money. That's an absolute lot of money. Uh, that's probably about the amount of money the Pentagon loses every every fucking year since they can't pass an audit. But that's not here nor there for this conversation necessarily. But he also says that this will certainly make it one of the most heavily armed armies in the world by all parameters. I don't think we want that either, right? Do we want to give Ukraine unfettered power by just providing them as much military aid as necessary? $1.5 trillion just doesn't come out of thin air, as we've all been dealing with record high inflation, and sure, it's starting to come down, but we're starting to kind of lose the economy too. Banks are really struggling. Large corporations are laying people off by tens of thousands, and I think we're really going to be hurting as an economy. So, like, do we want to just print 1.5 trillion more dollars to send to Ukraine, while also making them pretty much the most well-equipped army in the entire world? I don't know that that's necessarily what our aim is or should be, but that's ultimately what they're kind of going for. They want to protect their country, which I fully get and I fully understand that. But that's just not going to happen. 1.5 trillion is an unreal amount of money. It's absolutely unbelievable. Um, we've been sending them different tanks and armored vehicles and things like that, and like, what more could 1.5 trillion dollars bring them? I don't know. They're getting air defense systems. They're getting all of these things with billions, and they want 1.5 trillion. Like, that's just an unheard of number in my opinion. And with the leaks that came out and everything, saying that basically they're not even sure if Zelensky has a hold on his own government, and that they're just kind of doing whatever they want, and that they've been lying about this war in Ukraine a little bit about numbers and things like that. And obviously we haven't really seen any oversight of anything. We have foreign boots on the ground. We have U.S. boots on the ground. I mean, it was pretty damning that when these leaks came out. And so it's like now they're saying, okay, all these leaks came out. Supposedly Zelensky and his cabinet have embezzled over $400 million so far. If that's true, then how much money is he going to make off that 1.5 billion? I mean, we can't keep doing this. We have to get some kind of audit in there. We have to make sure that this money is actually going towards what they say it's going to. The U.S. government's been actually tapping Zelensky's phones and watching over him because they don't trust him. And that was part of the leaks. So it's like, everybody's flying these Ukraine flags and everything else. And, that's a, they got to support Ukraine. And like, I do, I'd support Ukraine. I just don't like taxpayer dollars funding all this kind of shit. Like, that's just not my MO. It never has been. It never will be. The taxpayers need some reprieve. We need to be cutting government budgets, slashing military budget, shit like that. But there's just problems all over the place. And again, I like to stress that Ukraine is not a NATO member. So we're funneling all this money to Ukraine, plus funneling all this money to NATO, and eventually, if Russia wins out in this war, then we're just going to be going to war with Russia because they'll probably actually attack a NATO member. With that being said, Hungary's deputy speaker states that Ukrainian NATO membership is only possible with Russia's agreement. As we know, they've been kind of trying to usher Ukraine into NATO through talks, and they started putting in Sweden, and I think it was Finland, and they're starting to come into NATO as well. So obviously, NATO expansion is going to happen, and is happening, but Ukraine is not going to be part of that. The Ukrainian speaker, or my apologies, the Hungarian speaker, Duro, said that Budapest sees no circumstances that would allow Hungary to support NATO expansion by admitting Ukraine to the bloc. She said, as long as Ukraine's borders are disputed and armed conflict continues, even NATO's own rules preclude Kiev's accession to the alliance. Without the risk of war, Ukraine's accession is only possible if Russia approves it in the form of a certain agreement. So, as we all know, that ain't going to happen. Russia is never, ever, ever going to agree to allow Ukraine into NATO. Even if, Ukraine beats them, that Ukraine ever back and they end the war and come to some kind of peace agreement, there's virtually no chance it gets into NATO. I think that's just kind of like off limits. They want this to happen, as I'm sure a lot of people want it to happen, but yeah, I believe that every acting member has to vote to allow them to come into NATO. And I just really don't think that that's going to happen at all. Especially Hungary would have to go back on what they said. So apparently, I'm reading here, new members for NATO have to be invited by a consensus of current members. And decisions to invite new members must take into account the required ratification process in the member states. And in the case of the United States, those decisions are made by consulting Congress. Well, as we know, Republicans kind of aren't really with Ukraine for sure. That's a big part of it. I don't know that they would decline NATO membership to them in Congress, even in a heavily Republican-held Congress, in any fashion. I just don't think that that's really going to happen, but it's definitely possible. I don't see why it's not. But we just kind of don't really know what this is going to look like. This war is probably going to escalate before it starts to die down, and that's a concern. Part of the leaks we saw is, like, obviously we know Russia is not very great at being armed, but apparently they're learning to go invisible by using like space blankets to hide their heat signature. So they find ways, but they may or may not actually have to keep finding ways, as Iran is actually sending arms to Russia. And that's a big deal. Obviously Russian munitions aren't really considered the greatest or the best in any fashion, but you know the thing that Iran does really well is actually reverse engineer captured U.S. weapons, and then they could turn around and sell them to the Russians. But ultimately, this article showing Iran shipped 300,000 artillery shells and 1 million rounds of ammo to Russia within 6 months. That's a lot. That is a definite lot of artillery, a lot of ammunition. I'm sure they will go through that very, very quickly. Um, Officials in the Middle East said that the last shipment of weapons known to have crossed the Caspian Sea to Russia left Iran in early March aboard a cargo ship. It was a 460-foot Russian vessel, and it carried 1,000 containers with 2,000 artillery shells. But as it shows, they've amassed over 300,000 artillery shells and 1 million rounds of ammunition. So that's quite a lot, obviously, and you kind of never know. They could send other stuff. They could very well start to send jets or some kind of like missile systems. We just don't know necessarily what Iran has, because again they do reverse engineer these American military like options or whatever, that they if they capture something, they're very good at just taking it apart and rebuilding it for themselves, and kind of figuring out how our all of our stuff works. China basically does the same thing with software and obviously other intellectual properties and things like that. So it's just definitely part of a concern, and I think that covers obviously a big part of the war. So, the last topic I want to touch on is the Tucker Carlson and uh, Don Lemon being let go from Fox and CNN, respectively. Uh, you know, Tucker Carlson supposedly was being let go due to some open discrimination lawsuit that he has against him. Don Lemon pretty much just let go because his ratings are dog shit. He's been moved around a lot, and that's kind of the telltale sign that something's going wrong with whatever you're doing. And he's been let go. What was funny is he kind of like tweeted something out that he kind of had no idea things were coming, and he didn't even get personally fired by the CEO or anything like that. And then CNN tweeted that that's absolutely not true, and that he was offered an in-person meeting and he declined it and turned it down. So he goes on lying, obviously just like Fox and CNN do. He might struggle to find some work, just because his ratings were low, and he's just kind of disparaged women a little bit, saying like they're not in their prime, in their 50s, and things like pretty innocuous stuff ultimately. But he seems like kind of arrogant, kind of like a kind of a cunt. I don't know, and now he's out. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. He'll probably try his own podcast or streaming or something like that, because that's what everybody needs is a Don Lemon podcast. Probably have less downloads than us. Who knows? But Tucker Carlson, I think, has a big payday in his future. OAN could snatch him up or something along those lines. Anyone I think would be really pushing for Tucker. I believe he had some of the highest ratings out of any news show that was on TV. He's a pretty smart guy. I know a lot of people don't like him, but if you listen to him and you actually look at his credentials and things like that, he's actually a pretty smart guy. He was on what's her name, Tulsi Gabbard's podcast, and I listened to that, and I actually couldn't believe some of the things that I heard him say about himself, and I think that he has a future going for him, and he's probably going to get a pretty big payday, so like it's not a big deal. To me, the whole Don Lemon one was funny because Tucker seems to just be taking it like, yeah, whatever, like I'll take my money, but Don Lemon sitting here fucking complaining about it, and then getting blasted by CNN on Twitter over his obviously lie in his thought process. So I find that whole situation pretty funny. And who knows, these people get recycled all the time unless they get canceled. And you're not canceling Don Lemon, I guess. People don't want to attack him for sure. But he's really just not a good journalist. He sucks. He's an awful talking head. So bye, Don. See ya. Bye, Tucker. You might actually be missed. But that's all I have for you today, really. What I've been watching lately, I started this show From. I've seen it in multiple articles. I believe a third season is coming out on Amazon Prime this month, actually. Maybe it might already be out, or it might be out in a couple days. But it's like a horror series along the lines of like The Haunting of Hill House. There was one, I can't even remember the name of it. It was also on Netflix, where this priest turns out to be a vampire. I can't even remember the name of the show, but that was actually pretty good. I think it was called Midnight something. And that's pretty much it. I've been reading a book about serial killers and stuff, which I find pretty interesting. But not a lot going on. Just again, trying to record this episode to make sure that the video and audio sync up properly and that my video actually stays on. This time it seems to have worked, but catch everybody next time.